The C apartment complex nestled quietly in the heart of the city, its dark windows resembling closed eyes lost in silence. On the third floor, the small apartment of Huy and Linh appeared faintly under the dim glow of the street lamp. The silence was so profound that the ticking of the wall clock in the living room could be heard with absolute clarity. The modest room was engulfed in an atmosphere of sorrow, its dim chandelier light failing to chase away the creeping shadows lurking in every corner. In the center of the room, a small cradle draped in a pristine white cloth stood desolately, a silent testament to an irreparable loss. Once a haven for joyful giggles, it now carried only an eerie emptiness, as if mourning its little owner. Linh, a 25-year-old mother, collapsed beside the cradle, her trembling hands clutching a pale blue blanket, the one little bough her firstborn daughter had loved the most. Her eyes, swollen and red from sleepless nights, had long since run dry of tears, yet the pain remained overwhelming. Her parched lips quivered as if to call her child's name, but no sound came forth. The infant, barely 8 months old, her precious angel, had departed forever that fateful afternoon, leaving behind a void no force could ever fill in a grieving mother's heart. In the corner of the room, the husband, the father, stood motionless, struggling to suppress his sobs. His hands clenched the edge of a chair, his frail shoulders trembling with despair. Under the pale yellow glow of the lamp, sorrow weighed heavily upon the space. His gaze froze upon the photograph of Bao V, placed neatly on the small altar. In the picture, little V beamed with a radiant smile, her chubby cheeks rosy like ripe peaches. But now, that very smile felt like an invisible blade slicing through his heart. He wanted to scream, to shatter the terrifying silence that engulfed the room, yet all he could do was stand still, allowing the pain to tighten around his chest like an unrelenting grip. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its cold, rhythmic beats mocking the helplessness of time. Every passing second stretched into an eternity for the grieving couple. Memories of Bao V surfaced vividly, as if it had only been yesterday. The first cries, the tiny fingers wrapping around her mother's hand, the babbling attempts to say, "By me." Now, they were nothing more than scattered fragments of a beautiful dream stolen too soon. Outside, the wind howled louder, the window rattling slightly as if reminding them that life moved on, even though, for Linh and Huy, time had seemingly stopped the moment they lost their beloved child. Just a week ago, Bao V had shown signs of a mild fever, her once rosy cheeks turning pale. Linh, guided by a mother's instinct, could not hide her concern, but reassured herself that it was likely just a normal teething fever. Little V was at the stage of early childhood, and symptoms like these were not uncommon. Linh carefully cooled her daughter down, cradling her in her arms throughout the night, softly humming a lullaby to soothe her. Yet deep inside, an unsettling worry had taken root from the very first moment. Huy, her husband, a busy civil engineer, was often away on business trips. The moment he received his wife's call, he immediately rearranged his work to return home. He was not only a devoted father, but also Lin's unwavering support during the most difficult times. "I'm home now, don't worry too much," Huy reassured his wife as he stepped inside, but his eyes betrayed his concern as they fell upon their frail child lying weakly in her mother's arms. They hurriedly took Vi to a nearby clinic, one known for its good reputation in the area. Their hearts held onto the hope of receiving sound medical advice and the best treatment for their child, but that hope quickly crumbled when they were met with a harsh reality. The doctor, a middle-aged man, barely glanced at the child for a few seconds without checking her temperature or listening to her heartbeat. In a monotone voice, he casually prescribed fever medicine and dismissed their worries. "Nothing to be concerned about. Kids get sick all the time," he said. Lin's motherly instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. "Doctor, my child has a high fever, difficulty breathing, and her lips are turning blue. Are you sure this is just a normal fever?" she pleaded anxiously. But the doctor merely waved a hand dismissively, his eyes glued to his phone screen where a soccer match was playing. "I've been a doctor for years. I can tell just by looking. Just follow the prescription." Though deeply unsettled, Huy and Linh had no choice but to take their child home. On the way, little Vi began crying uncontrollably, but her cries were no longer the clear, bright sounds of before. They were hoarse and weak, like a suffocated plea for help. That entire night, Linh never took her eyes off her child. While Huy sat beside her, his heart burning with anxiety, he could only hold his wife's hand tightly, clinging to the hope that their daughter would be okay. But reality was far crueler than they could have ever imagined. Bao V's fever did not subside. It worsened. Her cries grew fainter. Her lips turned a frightening shade of blue, and her breaths became short and desperate, like someone drowning. "Huy, our baby, she can't breathe," Linh choked out, her sobs caught in her throat. Without hesitation, Huy scooped their daughter into his arms, and the couple sprinted out into the night, racing toward the nearest major hospital. At the hospital, everything unfolded like a nightmare. Doctors and nurses scrambled against time, doing everything they could to save her. Machines, oxygen tubes, injections, every resource was mobilized. But her condition deteriorated far faster than anyone could have anticipated. In an instant, the emergency room descended into chaos. Lynn stood outside, her hands clenched so tightly they turned white, her legs trembling as if they would give way beneath her. Huy struggled to stay composed, but his eyes betrayed nothing but sheer despair. After hours of battling against fate, the head doctor finally stepped out. His face was heavy with sorrow as he looked into Lynn's tear-dried eyes and Huy's hollow gaze. Then, with a voice weighed down by grief, he softly said, "We did everything we could. My deepest condolences to your family." Those words struck like lightning. Lynn collapsed onto the hospital hallway, her heart-wrenching cries echoing into the night. "No! No, this can't be! My baby! My baby!" Huy stood frozen, his arms limp at his sides, his vision blurred as if the world around him had faded away. Their little angel, Balvi, had been declared gone. In that moment, their entire world shattered. 3 days had passed since Balvi left her parents' embrace, yet the small apartment on the third floor of the old condominium remained steeped in grief. The biting winter wind seeped through the window panes, rustling the thin faded curtains. The cold white light from the old ceiling lamp cast a glow over the pristine white funeral wreaths arranged around the tiny crib. The crib, once a haven that lulled Balvi into peaceful slumber, was now draped in a stark white cloth, standing empty, a silent testament to an unspeakable loss. Lynn knelt silently beside the crib, her vacant eyes fixed on Balvi's pale face. Her trembling hands gently caressed her daughter's once soft skin, now cold and rigid. The small, light blue blanket, an inseparable companion of her child, was still clutched tightly in her hands, as if the last traces of Balvi's warmth lingered on its fabric. "Vi, my love, why did you leave me?" she whispered through ragged breaths, tears streaming endlessly down her pallid cheeks. In the corner of the room, Vi, the husband, the father, stood motionless, his eyes red and weary, held a grief too profound for words. In his grasp was a small photograph of Balvi, her angelic smile frozen in time, her bright, innocent eyes filled with life. But now, that very image only tightened the vice around his heart. He wanted to speak, to comfort his wife, but his throat clenched shut. All he could do was watch as she knelt before the crib, her frail figure so delicate, so fragile, that he feared even the gentlest breeze might carry her away. The room was eerily silent. Only the sorrowful sighs of grieving family members filled the heavy air, each person drowning in their own sea of loss, too broken to form words. Then, amidst the stillness, something inexplicable happened. Lynn flinched, her hands trembling. "Huy!" Her voice was barely above a whisper, choked with disbelief. Her eyes widened in shock, as if witnessing the impossible. I think her hand just moved. Huy rushed forward, his eyes flickering between shock and a fragile glimmer of hope. "Don't panic, it could just be an illusion from exhaustion." But as he bent down and placed his hand on their child's tiny fingers, he felt something he would never forget for the rest of his life. A faint movement, as delicate as a passing breeze. His eyes widened, his trembling hands pressed gently against their daughter's chest. In that instant, a subtle warmth radiated from her small body, tightening around his heart like a vice. "Lynn, you're not mistaken. She's still alive," Lynn gasped, tears streaming uncontrollably. "Vi, my baby, are you really alive?" Her voice cracked, lost in a whirlwind of emotions. The grieving relatives, who had been silently bowing their heads, all looked up at once. Hope flickered in their eyes like a lone flame, igniting the darkness of a cold winter night. "Call an ambulance. Get a doctor. Now!" Someone shouted in frantic urgency. Dong Hui's cousin bolted for the door, fumbling for his phone as he ran. Meanwhile, everyone else gathered around the crib, their gazes locked onto Balvi's fragile face. Each person held their breath, waiting for a true miracle to unfold. Inside Lynn's heart, waves of emotion surged and intertwined. Despair turned into hope, sorrow transformed into joy, all colliding, swelling to the point of overwhelming her. Lynn clenched her fist until the screaming panic of the adrenaline pounded. She bent down, pressing her cheek against her daughter's chest, as if trying to feel each fragile breath returning. "Vi, mommy is here. I'm here with you." Her voice trembled, yet overflowed with love and reassurance. Just minutes later, the blaring siren of an ambulance pierced through the silent night. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the worn-out walls of their small apartment. Paramedics rushed into the room, bringing medical equipment and supplies. A nurse knelt down, carefully checking the baby's heartbeat. Suddenly, her eyes widened with urgency. "The heartbeat is weak, but it's there. Get her to the hospital immediately." No one in the tiny room could hold back their tears. Lynn collapsed to her knees, trembling hands clasped together, whispering a prayer. Thank you, fate, for bringing my daughter back." Within her, a tiny yet fierce flame had been rekindled. The flame of love, faith, and hope. At the hospital, the emergency room felt suffocating, as if an invisible force was pressing against every breath. Doctors and nurses swiftly took over Bao V's care. Her fragile little body lay motionless on the stretcher, delicate like a flower on the verge of being swept away by the wind. Lynn's hands clutched tightly onto the stretcher, her eyes filled with desperate pleading. Please, please save my child. Don't let her go. Her voice was hoarse, no longer just words, but a raw anguish plea from the depths of her soul. As the emergency room doors shut, Lynn stood frozen outside, her hand instinctively clutching her chest as if trying to keep her heart from shattering. Huy stood beside her, his hands firmly on her shoulders to keep her steady, though his own eyes mirrored the same fear and helplessness. Every passing second stretched endlessly, an agonizing torment of waiting. Inside the emergency room, doctors worked with intense focus and urgency. One of them bent down, pressing a stethoscope against Bao V's chest, then suddenly shouted, "There's a heartbeat! It's weak, but it's there!" The words sliced through the oppressive silence like a ray of light in the darkness. For a split second, everyone in the room paused before launching into action with renewed determination. "Hurry, prepare the ventilator, start the IV." The nurses moved in perfect coordination, their every motion precise, as if racing against death itself. Outside, the hurried footsteps of medical staff echoed through the hallway. But to Huy and Linh, all they could hear was the thunderous pounding of their own hearts. Then, suddenly, the doors burst open. A nurse rushed out, her voice trembling with emotion. "There's a heartbeat! The baby is alive!" Linh collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face as her entire body shook uncontrollably. Thank you, heaven, for listening to me," she whispered, her hands clasped tightly together, as if holding on to the fragile hope that had just been returned to her. Huy pulled his wife into a tight embrace, his own eyes brimming with emotion, but amidst the darkness of despair, a glimmer of hope flickered back to life. Vi, our little girl. We couldn't finish his sentence, but the tremor in his voice said everything. They didn't dare to let go of each other's hands, nor did they dare to take their eyes off the emergency room doors, where doctors were still fighting for every breath their daughter took. Finally, after hours of nerve-wracking tension, the head doctor stepped out. He was a middle-aged man with a weary face, yet his eyes held a deep, unspoken empathy. Seeing the pleading gazes of Linh and Huy, he let out a quiet sigh before speaking. "I have good news and bad news." His voice was heavy, mirroring the suffocating atmosphere of the moment. "The good news is that she's out of critical condition. Her heartbeat and breathing are stabilizing. However, we still need to monitor and continue intensive treatment to ensure a full recovery." His words breathed life into the exhausted couple. Linh collapsed onto her husband's shoulder, tears spilling down once more. But this time, they were tears of joy, of hope reignited in the suffocating darkness. Huy squeezed his wife's hand tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude beyond what words could express. But then, the doctor's next words made them freeze. "But the bad news is," he hesitated, his eyes filled with regret, "she was never truly. We made a serious mistake." The doctor's voice was low, heavy with regret. Her vital signs were too weak, nearly undetectable to the naked eye. She had fallen into a deep coma, but we mistakenly believed that she had passed away. Huy and Linh stood frozen. The doctor's words struck like a bolt of lightning, shattering the fragile hope they had just built. How could this happen? Lynn's voice trembled, barely escaping her lips. Does this mean if we hadn't realized it in time, our daughter would have been lost forever, all because of a mistake? The doctor gave a slow nod, his face filled with remorse. "I am deeply sorry. Your family saved her just in time, but this mistake is a painful lesson for us. I assure you, this matter will be thoroughly investigated and we will take full responsibility." Huy clenched his wife's hand tightly. His eyes burned with anger, but beneath it was an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Such a mistake should never have happened. "My daughter almost died, just because of your negligence." His voice was raw, like the roar of a wounded beast. The room fell into a heavy silence. Then, Huy's gaze softened when he saw his wife trembling. In that moment, he remembered what mattered most was that Bao V was still alive. He gently pulled Linh into his arms and whispered, "We have our daughter back. That's all that matters now." Despite all the hardships she endured, their daughter was still fighting every second to return to them. And for Linh, nothing in this world mattered more than that. News of Bao V's miraculous revival spread like wildfire, sweeping through the public, bringing not only shock, but also outrage, disbelief, and unsettling questions about the healthcare system. The story of a child coming back from the brink of death sent chills down people's spines, forcing them to confront the nearly unforgivable price of a critical mistake. But this was more than just a medical miracle, it was a wake-up call, exposing terrifying loopholes and hidden flaws in a healthcare system where every decision should be made with the utmost caution. Social media erupted. The public was in an uproar. Conversations echoed everywhere, from small coffee shops to office hallways. How could an unlicensed clinic operate so openly in the heart of the city? That question resonated in every discussion, carrying with it a growing anger at the failures in regulatory oversight. But what infuriated people the most was the thought that a child had nearly been buried alive when she still had a chance to live. Because of the negligence and complacency of those entrusted with saving lives, a mistake nearly led to an irreversible tragedy. Under mounting public pressure, authorities swiftly intervened, launching a large-scale investigation that captured the attention of both the media and society. As the truth gradually unfolded, the revelations were nothing short of shocking. The private clinic where Bao Vai's family had first taken her was found to be operating illegally, without a valid medical license. The doctor, who had carelessly examined her condition and merely prescribed fever medication, had not only been grossly irresponsible, but had also been practicing medicine unlawfully for years. The image of him casually looking at his phone while prescribing medicine for Bao Vi had now become a chilling symbol of indifference, sparking public outrage. But that was not the worst of it. At the hospital where Bao Vai was taken for emergency care, the process of declaring a patient deceased was found to be riddled with dangerous flaws. According to regulations, a death diagnosis must be confirmed by at least 2 doctors using specialized medical equipment. However, in Bao Vai's case, these critical steps had been completely overlooked. A young doctor, overwhelmed by the pressures of an exhausting workload, had relied solely on external symptoms to make a devastatingly wrong conclusion. A conclusion that had nearly cost a child her life. Failing to conduct a thorough examination using medical equipment led to a mistake that nearly pushed Bao Vi's family into an irreversible tragedy. When the details of the case were made public, a wave of outrage erupted. News articles flooded the media, while social media was overwhelmed with furious posts and comments, like a storm crashing down upon the healthcare system. People did not just demand an apology, they demanded change, a commitment that no other family would have to endure the same pain that Bao Vai's family had suffered. Under mounting public pressure, the Ministry of Health was forced to convene an emergency meeting with top medical experts. Nationwide inspections were immediately launched. Hundreds of unlicensed private clinics were identified and shut down. In public hospitals, the process of declaring a patient deceased was scrutinized and tightened like never before. New directives were issued mandating that every life or death decision be carried out with the utmost caution, following all rigorous medical examination protocols. However, the reforms did not stop at bureaucratic regulations. Bao Vi's story became a profound reminder of the ethical responsibilities in the medical profession. Doctors and nurses, those who face the delicate boundary between life and death every day, now approach their work with a deeper sense of duty than ever before. They realize that just a moment of carelessness, a single lapse in judgment, could push a family into an abyss of sorrow. For Bao Vai's family, this story was not just a tragedy narrowly avoided, but a miracle they would cherish forever. Every moment spent holding their little girl, listening to her faint yet persistent breaths, reminded them that they had not only saved their child, but had also contributed to awakening an entire system. And for society, Bao Vi's story became a beacon of light, illuminating the darkest corners and reminding everyone that every human life deserves to be safeguarded with the utmost care and compassion. For 2 weeks in the intensive care unit, Bao Vi lay silently on her tiny hospital bed, surrounded by the steady hum of medical equipment. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor echoed weakly, a fragile reminder that life still endured, like a flickering candle fighting against the storm. To Huy and Linh, every shallow breath, every slightest movement of their daughter was nothing short of a miracle, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness of despair. Linh never left her child's side for even a second. Her eyes, weary from sleepless nights, still radiated boundless love and unshaken hope. Through those endless days, she sat beside her daughter's bed, gently stroking her tiny arm, as if willing her own strength into the fragile body before her. From time to time, she softly sang Kanko, a lullaby her daughter had known since she was a healthy little child. Though her voice was hoarse from crying and exhaustion, it carried an inexplicable warmth. Each gentle note felt like an invisible thread binding a mother's heart to her child, who was fighting every second to return. "My love, be strong for me. Mommy is here, always here," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks, yet her hands never stopped touching her daughter, as if letting go even for a moment would cause the miracle to disappear. The nurses passing by couldn't help but be moved by the scene. A young nurse knelt down and gently took her hand, speaking with quiet reassurance. "Sister, your baby is so strong. She will pull through. She has you and her father here. That's all she needs." Despite his exhaustion, Huy took turns with his wife, keeping watch over their daughter. He barely left the room, afraid that if he looked away even for a second, a crucial moment might pass unnoticed. At times, he leaned close to Balvi's ear and whispered, his voice thick with emotion yet full of faith, "My little girl, you must be strong. You are everything to us. Mommy and Daddy are waiting for you to open your eyes." At first, their efforts felt like mere drops of water falling onto a barren desert. But then, something miraculous began to unfold. One morning, as Linh sat by her daughter's bed, as she always did, she suddenly noticed the tiny creases of Balvi's delicate eyebrows shift, ever so slightly like a fleeting breeze. She held her breath, afraid to believe what she had just seen. "We, our baby," she moved. Lena's voice trembled as she cried out, barely able to speak. He rushed forward, his eyes wide with hope. "Is it true, Linh? Did she really move?" His voice cracked with emotion, his gaze locked onto Balvi's tiny face. And then, as if answering their prayers, the little girl's fingers twitched. Her tiny hand slowly curled around her mother's finger. In that moment, time stood still. Tears streamed down Lin's face. "V, my baby." Even the doctors, who had witnessed hundreds of resuscitations, could not hide their emotion. One of them leaned down, placed a stethoscope against her chest, then smiled softly. "She is extraordinary. Her will to live is stronger than anything I've ever seen." From those initial small movements, Bao gradually regained her strength. Her delicate fingers moved more freely, her eyelids fluttered, and finally, her big, round eyes peeked open, filled with innocence yet glimmering with the light of life. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, we met his daughter's gaze. His heart swelled with overwhelming emotion. "V, you're awake. You can see Daddy, can't you?" He bent down, pressing a gentle kiss on her forehead, feeling warmth slowly return to her tiny body. Linh, overwhelmed with emotion, wrapped her arms around her daughter, cherishing every fragile breath, every tiny blink. To her, each breath was a miracle, a confirmation that they had not let go, that their love had kept her here, safe in their arms. As the lights in the ICU dimmed, Linh sat by her daughter's bedside, softly singing lullabies, whispering words of love. "You are everything to us. Stay strong, my love." Once lying motionless on the hospital bed, was now slowly coming back to life, like a delicate flower blooming after a raging storm. The doctors and nurses in the ICU, who had once doubted her chances of survival, now stood in awe of the tiny girl's resilience. They began calling her the miracle child, a symbol of strength and perseverance in the face of adversity. For Huy and Linh, their daughter's revival was a priceless gift, one they knew they would cherish forever. They had not only witnessed her return from the brink of death, but had also found renewed faith in life itself, a belief that love and hope could triumph over even the deepest sorrow. In her parents' embrace, Balvi smiled, a small yet radiant smile, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through the darkness that had once consumed their family. When Balvi finally recovered and returned home, life for Huy and Linh seemed to enter a new chapter, one where pain and suffering had transformed into something greater, something meaningful. Watching their daughter regain her innocent laughter, her round eyes shining with the light of life, Huy realized that her miraculous recovery was not just a blessing for their family alone. But more than just a miracle, Balvi's story became a calling, one that urged Huy to do something meaningful for other families struggling on the fragile boundary between life and death. He decided to leave his decade-long career as a construction engineer. "I want to do something so that no child has to go through what ours did," he told Linh one evening as they sat watching Balvi sleep peacefully. Linh didn't try to stop him. Instead, her eyes shone with understanding. "Our child was lucky to be saved, but how many others never get that chance? If you do this, I will always be by your side." From that determination, we founded a nonprofit organization called Little Warmth. Initially, it was just a small office in an apartment complex where he began reaching out to doctors, hospitals, and benefactors to support families with critically ill children. He didn't just help them access medical resources, he also provided emotional support, knowing that a family suffering wasn't just about illness, but also the helplessness and isolation that came with it. Linh, a preschool teacher, also found new meaning in her work. The days spent by her daughter's bedside had taught her invaluable lessons about love, resilience, and the power of hope. She started a blog to share their family's journey, from the pain of nearly losing their child to the miraculous revival of Balvi and the long, arduous road to recovery. Her heartfelt writing resonated with thousands of mothers, offering them comfort and faith in their own struggles. Before long, her blog gained widespread attention, becoming a space where mothers could come together to share, support, and empower one another. They shared their experiences, encouraged, and supported one another. But Linh didn't stop there. She organized gatherings where medical experts were invited to talk about child health care, disease prevention, and, most importantly, how to maintain mental resilience in the most challenging times. In the old apartment complex where they lived, a miraculous transformation was taking place. Neighbors, who once exchanged nothing more than polite nods, had grown closer. They weren't just drawn to Bao V's story, they felt a newfound desire to contribute to their small community. Friendly gatherings soon became a regular occurrence in the shared courtyard, where parents exchanged parenting tips and supported one another through hardships. During one such gathering, an elderly woman named Mai, who lived on the floor below, spoke with deep emotion. Seeing Huy and Lin's family overcome such adversity has given me strength as well. The children in this complex deserve to grow up in a community filled with love and unity. From what once seemed like insurmountable grief, Huy and Lin's family had discovered the profound meaning of life. They hadn't just saved their daughter, they had extended that warmth to other families, showing them that even in the darkest moments, love and hope remained the guiding light. In Bao V's tiny footsteps, in every smile of the children supported by a little warmth, and in every story Lin shared, there was a reminder. Sometimes, from the greatest suffering, people can create the most beautiful and lasting things. A year had passed since the miracle happened. This spring afternoon carried warm golden sunlight, bathing the old apartment complex as if sweeping away all painful memories. A gentle breeze drifted through the balconies, carrying the sweet scent of jasmine from tiny potted plants outside, weaving its way into the homes. That peaceful space was now filled with the pure laughter of Bao Vi, a little angel who could now run and play, her rosy cheeks glowing and her sparkling eyes as clear as precious gems. She toddled along the worn tiled corridor, each tiny step a testament to the boundless joy and resilience she had gained, something no one could have imagined just a year ago. Her little feet danced, kicking up fallen petals from the ground, and each burst of laughter shattered the lingering sorrow that had once enveloped the apartment complex. In the courtyard, neighbors gathered under the shade of an old almond tree. Their gazes were soft as they watched Bao Vi play. Sitting beneath the tree, Lin gently smoothed her daughter's silky hair, her eyes following every little movement. She didn't speak, but her heart overflowed with happiness and gratitude, an emotion so profound that no words could ever capture it fully. Beside her, Huy watched his wife and daughter, then lifted his gaze to the vast blue sky, silently thanking fate for returning the most precious thing in his life. Today's gathering was not just an ordinary celebration. It was a day for their family to share their story. The story of a little girl who had bravely crossed the fragile boundary between life and death. Huy slowly stood up, his eyes filled with emotions that were difficult to put into words. He knew this story was not easy to tell, but he also knew it needed to be shared. Holding the microphone firmly, his deep, steady voice resonated through the silent, attentive crowd. A year ago, I went through the darkest days of my life. There was a moment when I truly believed I would have to say goodbye to my daughter forever, that I would spend the rest of my life regretting that I couldn't do more to save her. As she lay there motionless in her tiny crib, we felt as if all hope had faded away. He paused, his gaze drifting downward to the tiny hand gripping the fabric of his shirt. Taking a deep breath, he continued, his voice carrying both gravity and a glimmer of hope. But then a miracle happened. It wasn't a divine intervention from above. It came from love, from the unwavering care and devotion of those around us. That night, when we saw her tiny hand move, when we rushed to the hospital clinging to the slimmest hope, I realized that sometimes, in our weakest moments, we discover our greatest strength. The room fell silent. Some lowered their heads, discreetly wiping away tears. Others reached for the hands of those beside them, sharing in the deep connection that his story evoked. Huy smiled gently, a smile filled with both happiness and the weight of everything he had endured. Today, as I watch my daughter play, as her laughter fills the air, I understand that miracles are not distant, unattainable things. They exist in the small yet profoundly loving actions we show one another. A miracle is in the unwavering gaze of a mother who never gives up, in the hands of a father willing to do anything to protect his family. Above all, the greatest miracle is love. Huy gently lifted Bao Vi into the air. The little girl burst into laughter, her tiny arms wrapping tightly around her father's neck, radiating pure joy. The entire courtyard erupted in applause, mingled with words of admiration and heartfelt congratulations. Lin stepped forward, softly placing her hand on her husband's shoulder, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotions. "That's right," she said, her voice gentle yet powerful, resonating deeply with everyone present. "Without the support and encouragement of those around us, we would not have made it through. Our story is not just about a miraculous child. It is a story about the power of community, about unity and sharing in times of hardship." Seated securely on her father's shoulders, Bao Vi waved her tiny hands excitedly, her bright eyes sparkling as if she understood that this story was, indeed, her own. A soft spring breeze drifted through the courtyard, carrying the sound of her laughter along with the cheerful chirping of birds, like a gentle reminder that as long as love and hope exist, miracles will always be present in this world. Ladies and gentlemen, be continued. His deep voice filled with warmth. We would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to listen to our story. This is not just a story, it is a journey that touches the heart, a testament to how love, faith, and hope can help us overcome even the most impossible challenges. Baovai's story is proof that miracles are not distant or unattainable. They exist in the simple yet profound acts of love and care that we show one another. This is a valuable lesson about the strength of community, about kindness and compassion, and about the meaning behind small but deeply sincere gestures. If this story has touched your heart, we invite you to help spread this message by clicking the like button, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to our channel. A small action from you can help bring meaningful stories like this to more people, offering hope and inspiration in their lives. Once again, we sincerely thank you for your support and companionship. We wish you and your family good health, happiness, and peace. See you again in the next story.